They're smiling. Lots can hear me.
Good evening.
Evening, Rabbi Cohen.
How are you?
Baruch Hashem. Fine, thank you.
Baruch
Lovely.
Hashem.
Were you there this morning at the Sim? I'm sure you were.
On Zoom. Yeah, they didn't let us in.
Oh, they just let you in. Can't do that.
Whoops.
Evening, Rabbi Cohen.
That's better. Now we're talking.
Oh,
Okay.
why did they let you in?
Only parents of the oldest class were allowed in, and everybody else had to keep safe.
Okay. I
Right.
went in person.
Oh. Special connections protects you.
No, it's just that your brother said something when he knew I wasn't going to come to the meal or anything, and he said, "Aren't you coming?" And I said, "No." And then I saw him yesterday, and I said, "You know what? I'm going to come to the Siyum, so I'm not going to stay for the food. I'm not really very sociable with people." And he was like, he laughed.
But it was very narcissistic.
It was lovely. I was so proud of all the boys, and they looked so nice in their t-shirts, and not that I could see much, but I could hear them.
Yes.
It was very, very, and I'm pleased. I'm very pleased because there's only a few people there.
Oh, safe. Okay, let me get this screen share on. Screen share is over here. We need to have it with sound. Okay, we're doing well there. Screen share, resume share. There we go. Let's just do this to make sure. Let's do that. We're almost ready. Okay. All right, Tio, here we go. I'm gonna switch on that screen so we can put this down. Hope it's still working there. Computer's catching up. Let's spot like that. Let's put this over here. Spotlight for everyone. Let's actually make that bigger so we can see what's going on there. And here we go. Rightio. It is another week, but this is a big week. It's not only the 3 weeks now that we're between Beimam and Hametzarim, between the constraints between the first fast, the Shiva Asar Tammuz, and Tisha B'Av, the fast of Av, which is next week, but we're now in the heightened days, in the 3 weeks, in the 9 days, and in this time we really need to up our game because we want to make it happen. We want to make sure that we have Mashiach now, and we have that third Beis Hamikdash, which we are exploring and learning about. So starting from the beginning, we had lesson 1, lesson 2, we're on to lesson 3. Welcome back. Do want to say a massive shout out and Yasher Koyach to Mr. Steinberger, who's not with us learning, but his schus is his. He's dedicated tonight's class in memory of his father, Rabbi Yirmiyahu ben Moshe alav hashalom, on the occasion of his yahrzeit. And the learning that we learn is to his memory, and it should be a bracha to the entire family. Be'ez Hashem, it should only have good news going forward. They actually just had a simcha in the family as well. Baruch Hashem. So, moving right in, we have tonight our work cut out for us. We are going to be covering a number of different items, starting off with the 2 kelim which are going to take the main focus of tonight's class, the shulchan and the menorah. If you remember, we have done quite a few of the different vessels going along. We started off with the kiyar and the oren in the first lesson 1. We went on to the outer mizbeach and the inner mizbeach last week, and this week we are going to be exploring the last 2 of the main kelim in the Beis Hamikdash, the shulchan, which is the showbread table, and the menorah, the candelabra. So we're going to focus on 4 points, 4 areas during tonight's class regarding these 4 kelim. Obviously, we're going to start off with, in general, what it is we hope to achieve in this focus, which is retaining that inner sanctuary that we described, developing that personal Beis Hamikdash, personal home for Hashem within our personality, and being able to maintain that awareness. Step number 1. In order to do that, then we're going to focus on the shulchan and menorah in detail, how they were constructed, what their function was, and that will be the bulk of tonight's class. And then, of course, we're going to explore the chassidus of what these kelim, these vessels are, the symbolisms. And chassidus is all about learning in order to make a difference. So the messages that these kelim bring to us, how they help us shape a productive, geula-oriented, a mission-driven life. Before we finish, hopefully if the time allows, we're going to try and at least for a couple of minutes, do a summary of the steps we have learned throughout the 3 weeks, last 2 and this week, and as we developed. So that's the objective of tonight's class. And we're going to start off with the beginning, maintaining godly awareness, how that works for us. So let's start off from the beginning. And we're going to start off by mentioning that this coming Shabbos is Shabbos Chazoin. It's usually known as Shabbos Chazoin because of the Haftarah that we read after the reading of the Torah, which starts over the Chazoin Yeshayahu. But famously, the Berditchever and Chassidus teaches that it's actually a Shabbos of vision, not just the vision of the prophet back in the day, but the vision of the third Beis Hamikdash, the third temple that is yet to come, which each and every single one of us manage and a merit to see when it comes to this coming Shabbos. So it's Shabbos Chazoin coming up. Of course, we've heard before, at least many of us may have heard it before, the mashal, and the comparing, the analogy that the Berditchever would give of the parent who sews a garment, a fancy schmancy suit for his dear child, and the child gets it ripped, and the father says, you know what, I'll sew you another suit. And then, unfortunately, the child rips the second one as well. After 2 ripped suits, the third one, he says, I'm going to make you another suit. But this time, I'm going to leave it hanging in the cupboard, and I'll show it to you every now and again, so you can remember what you're achieving, what you're looking forward to, what you want to aspire towards. And eventually it'll be yours. And the same as the Beis Hamikdash. We had one, and it got ripped and destroyed. We had a second one, and the same thing happened. The third one is waiting for us. And when we can get it right, when we learn to develop, we will be ours. It'll be given to us. But in the meantime, says the Berditchever, Shabbos Chazoin. Hashem lets us have a vision of that garment, of that beautiful Beis Hamikdash, so that we know we have what to work towards and encourages us. But this analogy, the garment, the suit, being compared to the Beis Hamikdash, works both ways. It also works the other way. The Beis Hamikdash can be compared to the garment. You know, when you go and get yourself a suit, the tailor doesn't just say, oh, what color do you like? And that's enough for me. What color do you like? What material do you like? What size are you? How long are your arms? How's your waist, your shoulders, everything fully measured. It's made to fit at every single part of the entire suit. It's tailored. And the same is true with the Beis Hamikdash. The Beis Hamikdash is tailored to us at every part of the Beis Hamikdash. And as the pasuk on the screen tells us, V'asu l'mikdash v'shachanti b'soicham, Hashem expects and encourages us to build him a mikdash, a home, inside every single one of us. And that home that we're creating for Hashem, just like a garment, in us too, every area of that Beis Hamikdash has to be tailored to the reality we're in and the home for Hashem that it will be. And every part of and every angle of that is what we're looking to tailor. So as we go through our tour of the Beis Hamikdash and we're learning life lessons and messages of the Beis Hamikdash, just remember that piece of clothing that needs to fit in every part of the clothing and every aspect of it. So Chassidus doesn't leave us hanging, and the Rebbe teaches us how. How do we hope to make a mikdash out of every area of our life? And the way Chassidus often breaks it down, Olam, Shana, Nefesh. Space, time, spirit. That sums up pretty much all of creation. There's space, area, geographical. There's time, the continuum before, present, after. And then, of course, there's the life, the spirit that keeps things going. Olam, Shana, Nefesh. And in each of these three areas, we aspire to be 100% focused. Every area in the world, every area where there exists, should be totally dedicated and sanctified to Hashem. Every moment in time. And every spirit on anything should always be focused on Hashem. That's the ideal. But until then, we start with baby steps. The baby steps in each of these three areas. And we build up towards our destination in each of these three, Olam, Shana, and Nefesh, the space, time, and spirit. So the way the suggestion is, start off with Olam, in space. Which spaces do we have influence on? So of course we go to a shul, which is a space of complete sanctity. And we're very careful what we say and don't say there, how we behave or don't behave there. But even at home, which is an area that is more within our domain, we start off with making at least one area, one corner of the home, a place for Hashem and it's holy. It might be the corner where you daven whenever you're ever at home, or where you sit down to write a letter to the Rebbe on a regular occasion. Or perhaps you sit down and you do a bit of extra tehillim if there's a time of need, or a time where you just learn some Torah. But there's a space, there's an area that you know that's the area where you feel, you go there when you want to feel more connected to Hashem. That's the beginning to make an area in your home spacely connected to Hashem. Of course, having holy books, Bayis Mali Sfarim is one of the 10-point mitzvah campaign. And having more and more holy books in your house is a great way of making the space that I have influence on sanctified. And of course, every room should have a chumash, a tehillim, a siddur, a tzedakah, especially in your kitchen before you bake or you cook. And it should be a part of the house. The house becomes a holy place. We're starting to transform, if not the entire world, but starting from somewhere, starting close from home. Of course, from there, it goes forward. And the same is true with time. Our schedule. We have Shabbos, it's pre-booked. Yomim Tovim, pre-booked. Like an important meeting. You've got to be there. Shabbos comes whether you're ready or not. So showing up for that meeting means inviting Hashem into that space of time, that area of time. Amazingly, the Oyel Moed is known as the tent of meeting. That's what the Oyel Moed translates. The meeting place, like a special meeting, we go to that space and time and we show up at that meeting where we are looking to meet up with Hashem. But amazingly, every single day, just start off with the area and time of being sanctified. And of course, not just area in the daytime, in the day, also in life. The early years of a child's childhood is so important to start off as an oasis in time, where from there it will spread forward. So being extra careful in childhood and making sure that that's dedicated to Hashem. Amazingly, there's a sikh talking about even the animals that the child plays with, the stuffed animals, should be kosher animals. Instead of having my child be a friend of a bear or a mouse, both of which are not kosher, let them be a friend of a friendly sheep, which is a kosher animal, or a duck, which is also kosher. Which music is my child listening to? What's the language like that my child overhears when I'm talking nearby? And of course, it continues to say, for the same price, the media, the pictures and the videos that they get to see and they are exposed to, again, of course, in that time, the early years of their life are important. And of course, the next step will be nefesh, not just another priority to keep Hashem welcome in our life. This becomes what I live for. My heart and mind focus. It's a top priority. Even if I'm not doing it the whole day, but as a list of priorities, sanctity always floats to the top of my list. Don't forget, this is our Beis Hamikdash. This is us making a home for Hashem. That's what we're trying to achieve by studying Beis Hamikdash and inviting little areas into our life. Olam, Shana, Nefesh, in space, time, and spirit. Okay, so let's jump into point 2, and that is, let's look at the actual vessels of today's lesson, which, as we said, will be the menorah and the shulchan. Okay. before we get into the actual vessels, let's talk whereabout are they located. So what you see on the screen now is the map of not the entire compound, but the main areas of the Beis Hamikdash. There wasn't Ezras Noshim at the front of this, but this square that you see here on the screen is the area of where the action took place. This is the holy area of the Beis Hamikdash, and this is the area that they wouldn't enter, even the Kohanim wouldn't enter unless they were going in service, more or less. So the first thing we want to look at is the red area we've just squared off, and that is known as the Chutzner. The Chutzner in English is a courtyard, and that entire box is the courtyard that surrounds the sanctuary, the building, the enclosed Heichal, which is the next area in the blue, and that Heichal has inside of it a regular holy area, the Kodesh, and in the further corner is the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. So as you can imagine, entering in to the Chutzner, you're on one level of holiness. When one enters into the building and you're in the Kodesh, you've gone up a notch. You've gone up to the next level. You're in the holy chamber. And then if you entered into the Holy of Holies, that's the highest level. And that was the order of where it went up. Now, amazingly, the vessels that we've explored are spread out in these three different areas. We learned about the Mizbeach and the Kiyar, second and first lesson. The Mizbeach being the altar, and the Kiyar being the wash basin. Those were in the Chutzner. Now, if you just stop for a moment and imagine you're thinking of this holy place, think of the cleanest, most beautiful marble shul, and that's what you think of when you think of the Chutzner. It actually was a very messy place. There was a lot of balagan. It was think of a butcher shop, not when they're having inspection, but the butcher shop when they're busy doing work, and there's meat around, and there's an enormous amount of animals coming and going. There's stuff being washed out. There's meat around. There's blood around. That's what was taking place in this Chutzner area. It was pretty much a butcher's area, but obviously for Korbanos. Amazingly, you think of some of the shuls you might have visited. Some of them are very neat, very proper, very well presented. They're presentable shuls. And then you get to a Hasidic shtibel. And you look inside and there's maybe some herring still left over. Maybe one or two of the tablecloths even have a stain on it. There's a couple of svarim here. There's maybe a talis not put away over there. And you think to yourself, come on, can't you make it a more beautiful shul? It's not a bad idea to make a beautiful shul. But someone once asked the Rebbe this idea, and the answer was along the lines of, when you have a big building, and the big building is running, and then you have to have heat, and you have a boiler room in the basement. The boiler room is not so much about making sure it's beautiful, it's made for real life. It's made to deal with the needs of the real people. And in that sense, you have not so much it's focused on the clean, but focused on the cleaning, the work that it takes. And that was the Chutzner, the area of action, which included also bringing animals and working through those animals, as we learned last week, elevating from the bottom up. That was the Chutzner area. The Kodesh area was the inner area, and that was where you had the inner Mizbeach, the Mizbeach Hasav. There it was not noisy. There was no animals coming in. At that stage, as we said, you had the Mizbeach HaZahav was already where you had the golden utensils, and in that area, the Aron was inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But over here you have the Mizbeach HaZahav, which was quiet, like the level up where a person's already achieved that elevation. And that's the place of what we learned last week, where you have just the soulful service of Hashem. A person's got rid of or let go of, detached from the coarseness of life and become a little bit more sensitive to start thinking Jewish, thinking and feeling the importance of important things. It's a far more idealistic level. Today, we're going to learn about the Shulchan HaMenorah. Guess where they were located? In that same inner sanctuary. Beyond, even a level further, deeper in than that Mizbeach HaZahav, than that refined altar. It's inside the Kodesh, and therefore, obviously, we can imagine already, it's symbolic of and testimony to a level of a human being already refined, deeper in. And of course, Chassidus will tell us it's not just a symbol and a testimony, it's from there where we draw our energy, our koyach, our ability to be able to aspire to that inside level. So if you're looking at this map, it gives us a good idea of where we're headed in today's class. We're looking at the Shulchan and the Menorah that are inside and even beyond the Mizbeach HaZahav. Okay, if anyone has any questions, comments, or suggestions, now's a good time to ask. Otherwise, we're going to move right along into the first of those two Kelim, which will be the Shulchan. Okay, so moving right along, we're going to start off with a little video. And the video is going to give us an introduction to the Shulchan. Here we go.
Inside the Mishkan was the Shulchan, the table, that held 12 uniquely shaped breads, the Lechem HaPanim. This table symbolized God's gift of livelihood, because no matter how much thought and sweat someone invests in his work, it is God who gives prosperity.
Okay, so we saw the intro, and we're going to go through step by step, analyzing the details one by one of the different areas of that Shulchan, and then we're going to try and understand the messages that the Shulchan brings to us. So starting up, oh, we just did that. Here we go. So we have the wooden table. It's a table, like any table or a special table, that had to be positioned, as we said, inside the sanctuary. So you have a table, okay, she would again, and it was coated entirely with gold. So now it's a golden table. What were the dimensions of this table? We said 1 cubit by 2 cubits with a height of 1.5. If a cubit, as we said, was 1.5 feet, so you have 1.5 feet by a 3-foot table. A 3-foot table isn't enormous. It's only 1.5 amos high. So you're talking about maybe 4.5, 1.5, so which would be 2 or 3 foot high. It's not a very tall table, but it's wood coated with gold. And that top area, the actual lid of the table, the top of the table, is a tefach thick. It's 1 handbreadth thick. Now, in addition to that, you have on top of that another top that goes, sorry, I apologize. The handbreadth that we learned first is the rim that goes around it. And then on top of that, there's a wooden top on top. So now you have 2 tefachim of wood that goes around, and both of those 2 tefachim are covered with a ze'er, with a crown. So a tefach isn't very big. It's not that tall, but when you have wood coated with gold, it does create weight, and these poles that would be positioned to be able to carry them had to be strong enough to carry this entire table with the gold covered lid and frame. That's the base of the table. The Shulchan literally translates as the table. But this table was there not just as a table, is a table that was decorated and built up with frames that enabled it to do the job it needed to do. So to start off, we're going to learn one frame at a time. We're going to learn soon that there was 2 such frames. Let's focus on one. There are 3 vertical poles standing up, positioned and connected to the table that rise above the table about 3.5 amos. And there's a rack system. Each one of those racks are shaped like a gutter, half pipes. And there are 3 rows of gutters, one coming from each of those poles at each shelf's height. Not on the bottom shelf, but 1, 2, 3 of those shelves. And the top row only has 2 gutters. So if you look at this picture, you can see that every row has 3 gutters, and the top one only has 2. Then there was the other side of that. Let's put the next step is there were golden trays on which the bread would sit, and each of those trays are made out of gold and sit on a rack on a shelf of this frame. Why were they half pipes? Why weren't they just rods or sticks? And the idea was they wanted cool air to be able to pass through underneath to keep it properly ventilated so that it could stay fresh. Why do we need shelves? Because, of course, if you pile bread one on top of the other, especially that size bread, one bread would crush the other and the bottom bread would be smushed. And that's why we have shelves for each one. And in addition to these 2 sets of racks, each one having 6 shelves, a bottom one, and then the ones on top, 5 on top of them, there were also, between these 2 frames, there was space to have 2 golden spoons that were placed on the table between the loaves. Now, amazingly, everything we see in this picture, from the table cupboards, the poles, the frames, the racks, and the plates, and including the spoons, are all made, or at least covered with gold. Obviously, extremely beautiful in this internal space inside the Beis Hamikdash. And as we learned already in the very first week, gold in the Beis Hamikdash symbolizes already refined state, already full of love. Zahav, which is the expression of completion where a person is fully in tune. Let's talk about the bread for a moment. Every week they would bake 12 loaves of bread. How big was each loaf of bread? Each loaf of bread had 2/10 of an ephah, which is roughly about 5 liters worth of mixture. It's quite an intense bread. And they were called lechem hapanim, bread of faces, because as you can see, and we saw in the video earlier, the bread wasn't just a flat bread. It was a flat bread that went up on the sides, and that was how it had to be made. They were baked in a metal tray that went into an oven and baked them well. And then once they were already baked, they were then transferred into the golden trays that would actually sit on the shulchan as it was inside. What was inside the spoons? There was a special mixture called the frankincense, the levina, and that would be offered every Shabbos. It would sit on the table every entire week. At the end of the week, they would take the content of these golden spoons and actually offer it on the mizbeach. And at the same time, they would take the loaves off the table and replace them with fresh loaves, replace the content of the spoons with fresh levina, and the loaves would be eaten by the kohanim. The Mishnah describes how this exchange of replacing the old bread with the new bread was a 4-man process. There 2 people would come in with the fresh bread, and there would be 2 kohanim which would be tasked with taking off the old bread. And the idea was we never leave the shulchan without bread. So as they were bringing the old bread off the shulchan, off the table, the other fellow, his mate, was bringing the new bread straight away on, and there was always there. Amazingly, the Mishnah also describes the miracle that took place, that the bread always stayed fresh for an entire week. And another interesting thing the Mishnah describes is that the people who would eat those loaves were on a mission. It was part of the service of Hashem. Who would eat it? So generally speaking, the Beis Hamikdash had turn shifts, mishmaris, and every week the changing of the mishmaris, the changing of the guards would take place in Shabbos, which would mean that every Shabbos there was 2 shifts on board, and the incoming and the outgoing, each of those groups of kohanim would be involved in eating those loaves of bread as part of the service of Hashem. They would be eating the lechem hapanim. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the menorah. I do want to say the video we're about to show isn't exactly accurate, but it'll be a warm-up in which we will then describe some more of the accurate details of what the menorah actually looked like. Here we go. Oops, we don't have sound. Okay, if we had time, we might have played Spot the Mistakes in the video. I'm sure some of you do really well. But in the meantime, instead of playing games, we're going to actually explore what it is the menorah did look like, and then maybe we can look back if we have time afterwards to see how it changes. What you see here on the screen now is a solid block of gold. A solid block of gold that weighed a kikar. A kikar is a talent of gold, and it was solid block, heavy, but that's what it looked like, just a block of gold. And it was from this block of gold that they had to hammer out a menorah. Not melt it down and turn it into menorah, but literally hammer and chisel and bang, not chisel, but bang and bang until they actually turned it into a menorah. Now you can see it's quite intricate and it's very specific, but all of that had to be made in an enormously special way. Now, before we actually explore the details in the menorah, I do want to say there is a lot of misinformation about the design of the menorah. It doesn't help that in Rome, Titus's arch that has in it engraved into the arch the Yiddish people being dragged down in chains as captives, with carrying down the kalim of the Beis Hamikdash, including a menorah that looks round, when in fact the menorah wasn't round, the menorah was triangular as we see it here. The Rambam actually has a diagram that he personally drew to teach us the shape of the menorah, which includes this shape as you can see on the screen. Now, although in Rome it looks round, you can imagine that the Romans weren't interested in providing accurate history that the menorah is round or circular. They like to draw a menorah the way they liked. In addition to that, it's quite obvious that a lot of menorahs were taken down from different areas in the Beis Hamikdash, many of them looking also very beautiful, and it's quite possible that they copied one of those menorahs because they didn't really mind which one it was. It so happens that if we follow the teachings or the understanding that we get from Titus's arch, which is a symbol of the Yiddish people being crushed, Rahman al-Islam, it almost adds to the Golus, and therefore teaching and learning about a correctly designed menorah is the opposite of that and helps us live Geuladig. So let's look at this menorah and let's look at the different details, the way it's described in the pasuk, what each one of them has to be. So here we have the menorah hammered out of a solid block, and let's look at one of the branches zooming in or focusing on. So the branches you can see is one of 6 slants, 3 this way and 3 that way, and the center, but each one of them is decorated in the same way. They have in them 1 flower, they have in them 1 bulb or a ball, and 3 cups. And that's each branch has, and it's part of the design, it's part of how it's formed, and that's how the Torah explicitly tells us to have the menorah designed. Amazingly, according to Kabbalah, each one of these cups, and the Rambam draws this way, is upside down cups. And Yiddishkeit, Jewish mysticism teaches us, this also is part of the symbolism where the greatness of the menorah is turned downwards, flowing towards us from Hashem's sanctuary, from his home, and it's giving us goodness here in this world. Amazingly, we also have, besides for each of these branches having this intricate design, each one of the joints of where the branches meet have an additional bulb or ball in the middle, and then again in the stem there's an additional 1 more round of a flower, 1 bulb, and 1 cup over here. As you can see, there's a round base on the menorah, which is held up with 3 small legs underneath the round base, and at the base of where the stem meets that base, there's 1 more additional flower. How tall do we think this menorah is? Of course, you can imagine, you think of the menorah, there's so much to talk about. The menorah is 18 tefachim tall. 18 tefachim tall is roughly 1.5 meters in height. And that's how tall the menorah was. Yet, we are told that in the Beis Hamikdash, there was a set of steps. And the Beis Hamikdash was chiseled out of stone, and there were 3 steps going up for the Kohen Gadol to be able to go up there to prepare the lights and to light them in order that the Kohen Gadol shouldn't have to lift his hands above his head where the tzitz was positioned. That had Hashem's name on it. He would go up the stairs and do it from a height and leaning downwards to do that. The way the menorah was designed, each one of the branches had a lamp on it, and the lamps were designed as such that the flames all leaned in and face towards the center. So all the flames are heading towards the center, and the center rises upwards. The tools that the Kohen Gadol would use in order to prepare, clean out, were also made out of gold. Remember, we said everything inside the inner sanctuary is golden. That's the idea, the message that we're taking here. There were golden tongues, golden spoons, and shovels to be able to take it out. Let's talk for a moment about the oil that was used to light these candles. Of course, it was pure olive oil that was needed, but that wasn't enough. In an ideal state, the pure olive oil was from the very first drops of the olive. Of course, cold press, virgin olive oil, nothing less, but only the very first drops. It was the purest of the pure. And making the westernmost lamp burnt the entire time. And that's perhaps one of the sources of having a Ner Tamid in a shul, where there's one light that stays lit, and that would continue being lit and will not be extinguished until all the other lights had already been cleaned, refilled, and relit. And only when the other lights were already lit would the Kohen then quickly put out that light, that westernmost light, clean it, prepare it, and light again that western light. So that's a little bit about the details of the Shulchan and the Menorah. We're now ready to go on to the next step, which is the symbolisms and the chassidus of these items. If anyone has any questions, comments, or suggestions, please feel free to unmute yourself at any time and ask. Now's a good time if you do have. Any questions? Okay, moving right along. We're now going to discuss what it is that the Shulchan and Menorah do for us, what they mean to us, and then we'll look at how we can incorporate them into our lives. We're starting off again with the areas within the Beis HaMikdash. The Chatzar. What is a Chatzar in modern language? What word would we use to describe a Chatzar of a house? So a courtyard in today's day and age has a different connotation than perhaps a Chatzar would have had back in the day. But a Chatzar is, in an old-style house, would be like what we might call the garage or the outhouse. It's where we would be busy doing any sort of preparation that's messy. A lot of cooking and preparing food was done in one's chutzner, and that's why most chutzers have a wall around it, not just to keep people out, because it's private. In gardens today, we sit out in the garden, but it's not a messy place. A chutzner isn't a gina. A chutzner isn't a garden. A chutzner is an outhouse. And that's exactly what took place in the chutzner. Like we said earlier, it was messy. There were animals, there was noise, there was commotion. Even the fire on the Mizbeach had commotion. And of course, there was a wash basin there, and the wash basin including washing, as well as the washing stations that were in this area that had also all sorts of tools to help the Kohen prepare. The inner part of the sanctuary, the Kodesh, was the inner house. So imagine you have your messy area, perhaps the area in the kitchen that it's used to do the stuff that isn't always clean, and then you wash it down and clean it, of course, but it's the noisy area. And then you have the inner area, the inner house, the Kodesh. That might be your dining room, it might be upstairs, it's a quiet room, your office space, your study. And these two areas, the outer area and the inner area, in the lesson and the symbolism that they carry for us, is the difference between the before and the after. The inside is the Aron. We just had that explained. And that Aron is the area that was the holiest place, and that's where it's fully after. After what? Before and after what? What are we talking? So if you think about the Beis HaMikdash as being a place of refinery, the Chatzar is the place where the refinery is taking place. It's the process of taking me, stuff, materialism, this normal life, and working it through. And that's not always a clean start. And once we get inside, that's the after the refinement process. That's the refined world on the inside where it's all gold. And that's the analogy we're going to borrow and build off. So let's focus on the innermost part. As we started off in the very first class, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies, is the most inner, most refined. It's symbolic of the stage of where Torah, or the vision of Torah, is already revealed. It's perfection. What do we understand that to mean? When we learn Torah, we are understanding the wisdom of Hashem. That's the Hashem's truth, and Hashem's truth is the transcendent truth, the truth that's truth all the way through. That's what the Aron, the innermost part of the Beis Hamikdash, is symbolic of. Further out, we have the Mizbachos. Yes, we mentioned the Kiyar, the washing station, which is the detachment in the beginning. But let's talk about the two Mizbachos, the two altars. The outer one, which, as we said, is the refinery that burns upwards, meaning elevating from the bodily perspective, from the mundane of real life, refinery there. And then you have the inner Mizbeach, that's refinery of the soul. Last time we described that, we said you have a refinery of souls when we start thinking like a Yid, when we start feeling reality as it truly is. And that is those two ideas. Both are a Mizbeach, both are elevators, both are lifts that give us a lift. One is where we start becoming sensitive. We sensitize ourselves. We make ourselves into a vessel for Hashem, a vessel to be able to listen, to even notice and hear what our soul is telling us. And from there, we move inwards and to the next level where we're elevating the inner reality of man, when we begin to have a heightened reality. But before we become sensitive, we don't even notice that such a thing exists. We are unaware that there's even a taste to be developed. It's only once we have had our first step, the chotzer, we've worked through the coarseness, that we begin to appreciate the inner elevator, the elevator of the golden altar inside the inner sanctuary. Those are the two steps. But the Shulchan and the Menorah is the process beyond that. The Shulchan and the Menorah that we are focusing on today, Shulchan and the Menorah, both made out of gold, are both positioned inside the inner perfected space. It's already after. We've already worked through the Mizbeach HaChitzon, we've worked through our animalistic side, and we've made it into the inner sanctuary. At that place, we have, again, physical perfection and a soul spiritual perfection. What was on the table, on the showbread table? Bread, symbolic of physical needs. And as we saw in the video earlier, that's where we daven that Hashem give us and fulfill us with all the koiches, all the power and energy that we need to be able to manage physically in this world. But on a golden table, inside the inner sanctuary, Hashem should bless us, not just with stuff, but stuff physical in a perfected way. Not just that we'll have perfect the amounts of that, but in a way that we use it and we work with it in a way that's elevated, physical perfection. And then you have the menorah that gives us light, fire, and warmth. And that's the spiritual side of perfection where our neshama is shining. This is the Torah perspective of reality. This is how the Torah envisions a world, a Mashiach world that we can live in. The Shulchan and the Menorah. That's what it's symbolic of. Now, how does it tie in? What does it mean to us? That's what we want to explore. But let's learn first how it ties into the process of the journey the Beis Hamikdash symbolizes. We start off with the Mizbeach HaChitzon, the Chatzah courtyard, which is the diverse conflict where heaven and earth meets. And that's where it starts from. We start from animalistic karbonis. And from there, our inner conflict, we travel into our destination, which is the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the unity of absolute holiness. I'm going to ask you to remember what we said off in the very first class, where we said the difference between purity, tahara, versus kedusha, holiness. Purity versus holiness. To be pure is to disengage, to let go of the things that are impure. To be holy means something much more than that. To be holy means to unite, to bring together, to fuse these two areas. Hashem echad, U'Shemoy echad. The Eibishter is one, and His name is one. Every part of creation, everything that Hashem created is part of Him. It's the famous song, Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. There's nothing that's not part of Hashem. And the Beis Hamikdash teaches us, don't just go to your little corner in your house, or the 20 minutes, half an hour in the morning, or the priority when you have it, and make that holy. But borrow from that corner. Borrow from the shul experience. Borrow from the early morning or childhood life. And bring that with it so that every part of my life is infused. And that fusion is called Kedusha. That's what holiness means. That there's no area in life that doesn't have absolute Kedusha. It fills our inner sense with strength. So between the menorah and the shulchan, the menorah will give us the light, and the shulchan will give us the strength. Let's do that in practical terms, and after this, we'll be able to understand how the Beis HaMikdash is today giving us those tools to live Mashiach life. What do you see? A lighthouse. A lighthouse is important. Why do we need lighthouses? Because when it's dark and we don't know where we're going, we don't have clarity. And one of the most important things in life is to know where we want to go. Because even before we can get anywhere, we have to know where we would like to be. It's a beautiful story of Mendel Futerfas when he was away in jail in the Gulag, and he was discussing with one of his fellow comrades in jail, and he happened to be a tightrope walker, and they did a whole presentation, and eventually Mendel's talking to him, and they were discussing what is the hardest part of tightrope walking. And Mendel guessed, and he was right, that the hardest bit of the tightrope walking, not walking across, regardless of how high it is. The hardest bit of the tightrope walking is when one has to turn around and come back the other way. And as the fellow described to Mendel, that whilst you're walking along the rope, if you know where you're going and you keep your eyes on the goal, it's not a problem. It's not the slightest problem. The problem is when you lose sight of where I need to go, when I no longer see the goal, I don't have clarity, that's when it gets shaky. And that's when you really got to focus on not falling. And then when you see your goal again, you're good to go. The menorah is that guiding light. Hashem doesn't need light in the Beis HaMikdash. The menorah is not built to make the home of Hashem bright. Hashem creates light. The design of the menorah is in order to bring light to us. And that's what the menorah's job was, to be a guiding light, clarity of vision. We have so many things going on in our life. Think about it. Every minute you're wearing a different hat. There's something else going on. How do we navigate this mix of different goals pulling us in different directions? There's so much distraction. There's so much going on. And every minute we're thinking something else is on the top. And the Rebbe tells us that the answer to being able to decide what to do and what not to do is to be a light. You be a light. You be a shining menorah. And when I'm a shining menorah, making those choices is the way to be able to navigate. What does it mean to be a light? Think about where I can make the biggest impact. Which one of these choices, which one of these focuses are going to make me the most productive, are going to help me make the biggest impact? And when I think of it in those terms, that already gives me an additional clarity that helps me choose between the so many different distractions in life. What does it mean to be a light? It's a great question. And in Tanya, chapter Lamed Hey, chapter 35, the Alter Rebbe tells us that we are a light. The pasuk says so. Kinei mitzvah Torah, bring light into the world. What is a light? Says the Alter Rebbe in Tanya. It's made up of 3 parts, and this is what we need to be talking about. There's the wick, there's the flame, and there's the fuel that burns it. Says the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, you want to be a light? We want to be that menorah message. What does it mean to me? There's the body, which is like the wick. That's who I am. There's the soul, which is the flame that burns and shines. And then there's the fuel. What's the fuel? The fuel is the world around us, the mitzvahs that we do. If I'm elevating my surroundings, that's me shining. If I want to shine and be a flame and be a candle, the best way to self-refinement, to be the best me, is to be elevating and making a difference in my surroundings. Ner mitzvah Torah, that fuel, taking the universe around us, the surroundings in which I find myself in, I'm lighting it up, elevating that becomes the fuel that enables the wick in the body, the wick in the flame, the body and the soul to shine and be a productive candle. So what are we learning from the menorah? We're learning from the menorah that inside, Hashem is telling us there's a golden menorah that's shining light. And as we said, the cups are poured downwards, shining light, giving us the ability to be a candle that lights up our surroundings, including the wick and the flame, the body and the soul, by way of the fuel, by surrounding, uplifting, and making a difference in the world around us. Ner mitzvah v'Torah, a menorah message, And the Shulchan also, right next to it, also carries a very important message. The Shulchan, as we said, carries the bread, which is symbolic of materialism and stuff, things that we need to eat, we need in order to be materialistic in this world. But in addition to that, it's also symbolic of the journey of bread. And as we have from the beginning, very beginning of creation, where Adam is told, bread is symbolic of sweat, of the hard work it takes to create wheat is hard work. To create flour out of wheat is hard work. To turn a flour into a dough is hard work. To start a fire is hard work. And all of that together allows us to be able to turn something into bread. But those challenges that the bread symbolizes is very much a part of what we're talking about. Amazingly, the word lechem, which means bread, has the same root as the word milchama, which means battle, the struggle, the challenge. Is there anything positive about battle? Sounds quite negative. Why are we highlighting lechem? Why are we so dependent on lechem? But why do we have lechem upon him, inside the Kodesh, inside Hashem's sanctuary, on an elevated level? And of course, the answer is that battle and struggle doesn't have to have a bad connotation. Lechem upon him is double-faced milchama, double struggle. Because as Chassidus teaches us, life isn't about being Mr. or Mrs. Perfect. It's not about being perfect. It's about the challenge. And that's the purpose of creation. The purpose of creation is that very challenge. And that's why lechem is inside the Kodesh. Because as Hashem delivers a challenge, we work towards getting through that challenge. And guess what happens after the challenge is worked through? There's another challenge that comes up. And that's how Hashem designed the world. And what we're learning here is that each one of these challenges has panim, has two faces. There's one face in which we look at it and we see a challenge, and facing that very challenge on that same bread, made out of the same challenge, is the strength to grow out of that challenge. The bread is giving us sustenance. And this is the bread lesson of the Shulchan inside. We had the Menor that tells us to be a light. And now we have the Shulchan that tells us that whilst you're a light and there are challenges thrown at us, see the two panims, the two faces of that showbread. On one hand, every challenge is there. And at the same time, that challenge is developing me, making me a shining light even more, because it's the lechem, the struggle, that is the reason of creation. And that's the inner sanctuary. When I've managed to let go, detach myself from the coarseness of materialism, and I've managed to offer up an offering on the altar, I have real meat. It's just the geschmack of that meat which is left behind. Now I can ready to be able to listen, to hear that in my own life, I can be a shining light, and I can use those challenges. I have the strength to grow out of them and be able to turn around the world. Powerful, subtle, edel. It's a refined taste. It's a soulful taste. And the Beis HaMikdash is all about that, developing that. In the next 3 minutes, I'm going to try and do a recap of what we've learned over the past 3 weeks. And then we'll have maybe time for any questions or suggestions as we go along. So starting off with the first point that we learned all the way back, we started off with focusing on the first item that was made in the process of the Beis HaMikdash, and that was the Aron. The Aron, we said, was the innermost part, but it represents the golden absolute truth of Hashem. Inside the Aron, it housed the Torah. It housed the Torah, which is Hashem's wisdom to us. It had the luchas inside there. Next, we have, after the Aron, or part of the Aron actually, is the reason why the Aron was there. The whole Beis HaMikdash revolved around the Aron. The Aron is very much about what the world was created for. It's hard for us to imagine. It's hard for us to think of a world which is perfect. It's hard for us to imagine that there could be a place, there could be a universe in which we meet people, engage with people, and it's good on all levels. But that's what the Aron is teaching us. We're on a journey, but the destination The trajectory in which we are headed is to get to a place where there's an Oren, where there's goodness. Goodness on the level that Hashem is true. A Torah that's inside there in Shainia is the deepest place. And that's the end of the journey. Until then, at least we know what we're aspiring towards. So it's mentioned first, even though it's used last. That's the goal. We then have the very first item that was used, which was taught to us last, is the kiyar. The kiyar is the wash basin. And we said the wash basin's there at the very first step. A Kohen walks in, I'm Mr. Cohen, I'm ready to go. And the first thing is wash away the ego. Allow myself to be a little bit less attached and sunk into coarse materialism, a little bit more sensitive. That's the first step of the process. Be willing to be open, to understand that there's a deeper, more refined taste to develop. That's the kiyar. It's the last to be made. It's the first to be used. Because without that, we're not yet ready to even bring any offerings on the Mizbeach. Once we have the kiyar, we're now ready to move along from there onto the Mizbeach Chitzoin, which is the animal Mizbeach. It was in a noisy place. It was full of animals. It wasn't a clean area. It was a butchery. It was where there was animals making noise. Even the fire crackled, and it was the resistance of the burning wood and the animal meat made a big noise and a tumult. And that's exactly what it takes to struggle, to try and elevate our personal pleasures, to elevate our personal desires and put it on a Mizbeach. Not that we're going to stop doing what we do, but we're going to allow ourselves to elevate that, to take out the life of an animal from ourselves and sacrifice that on the altar, which will mean we have fleish geblieben. We'll have meat to be eaten, but it'll be meat that is in an elevated state. In simple terms, allow ourselves to have pleasure, geschmack, in godliness. Develop a pleasure in doing good things. That's the next level. Beyond that, as we go further, is then we allow ourselves, once we've allowed the coarseness to be elevated, now we're ready to hear what it looks like to think and to feel like a yid. Here we're no longer bringing animals on this Mizbeach. Here we're bringing ketores, a beautiful smell, an aroma, which is something that the soul enjoys. It's a more developed, subtle process. But it's this process that allows us, it's so empowering, it's liberating to know that I can actually enjoy doing good things. I can get a geschmack out of being able to engage in my soul. It's me. It's the real me. It's an internal me that finds fulfillment in this here and now. How so? First, by washing away, by offering up the coarseness, and now I'm ready to elevate my soul, to think like a Yid, to feel Jewish not in an external way, but in a very internal way. And from there, we move on to what we learned today, the Menorah and then the Shulchan. The Menorah brings us clarity of vision, and clarity of vision not only to know where I have to head, but how to get there. I should be a light. I should be a shining light in every choice that I make. I'm deciding whether I should or shouldn't have breakfast right now. The choice revolves around which is it going to make me more productive or less productive. Should I have a healthy lunch or an unhealthy lunch is the same exact question. Should I go to sleep on time or not go to sleep on time? It's the same question. Which of those is going to make me in a more shining light? Which of those is going to make me a clarity, a lighthouse of what I was designed to be built, to do? And then going from there, we have the Shulchan that teaches us the showbread, that bread comes from Hashem, and the challenges come from Hashem too. Lechem is the Muhammad, the struggle. And from there, I go into the next journey and the next journey, and this is inside the sanctuary. And in a refined prayer process, I develop an understanding that everything about life, including the materialism, is there to help me become a better person. And this is what the whole Mizbeach is about. It brings us full circle into the innermost place. This is the way to get to an Aron reality. How do we get there? By allowing ourselves to change one little bit and another little bit more and another little bit more. As we started with Shalom, Shana, Nefesh, one little space in my home, one little moment in my morning, one more emphasis and priority. And it's from there, Lashana, Haba, Yerushalayim, we bring Mashiach Tzidkenu, and we'll be able to live in a Beis HaMikdash, in a world that has a Beis HaMikdash, that it's infused with a geschmack, an enjoyable Yiddishkeit, that it keeps us thriving. We start already today. I just want to end off by saying again, a The Eibusher should give an aliyah to the Neshama B'Yom Ben Moshe Alav Shalom, and special brachas to his family, especially Mr. Steininger, who sponsored tonight's class. I thank you all for joining, and I wish you all a very good bench devach. It should be a Mashiach devach in your own personal life and for Yiddishkeit in general. If anyone has any questions, comments, or suggestions, now's a great time to ask or to speak up. Please unmute yourself. Everybody else here can wait for a moment. Thank you so much.
Oh, I've got a question.
Please.
Last night in the Shir,
Yes.
you were speaking about the Yidden when they were going to Israel, and you said some of them didn't want to go. They wanted to stay where they were, but they wanted to go, the majority. It
Yes.
also says in this week's parasha that Hashem spoke to the people through Moses, and before that, Moses transmitted Hashem's message. Was the reason that Hashem directly to Moshe's mouth because he wanted people to understand exactly what was going to happen? And was it, to do with the work that they were going to have to do and start again when they moved?
I think that, yeah, you make a very, very good point, and there's a lot of importance to that. When Moshe Rabbeinu is the conduit for Hashem, it's the idea of having Nevi'im, prophets, which is one of our principal faiths, and we believe that Hashem communicates to prophets because it's about humanity becoming partners with Hashem. So yes, Hashem has a message for us, but it's being channeled through a human mind, and it's been given over to us by a human Mashiach. And that's very much part of what we learned tonight, that the Beis HaMikdash is a place that relates to real life. That is a journey of real human beings connecting to Hashem in that way. So yeah, I think you have a very good point. Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
All righty. Atzlacha Rab, everybody, and a wonderful week, a wonderful month, and a wonderful year. Besuras Tovos. Thank you for joining.
Oh, thank you.